Good time, educators. I'm Austin Veeder. Me and my partner, Kistandi Stevenson, are here to take you through the history and cultural reclaiming of the term queer for the benefit of teachers in the classroom so they can understand the cultural uses of the word queer for students a part of the LGBTQI community. In this presentation, we'll go over what the word queer means now, as well as its historical and cultural experience, the rough history of the evolution of the word, with an overview of how the word changed and how the LGBTQ community has reclaimed the word over time. According to the Oxford Dictionary, queer's definition in the modern era is, as stated, a person having a sexual or gender identity that does not correspond to or that challenges traditional, especially heteronormative, ideas of sexuality or gender. The word queer concretely appeared in 1513 as an adjective meaning strange, odd, or peculiar. By 1749, queer was used as a language intensifier. Queer became a word to mean out of sorts or unwell by 1865. As we entered the 20th century, queer took on a negative connotation as a derogatory term for homosexual individuals. However, by the 1970s, LGBTQIA communities began to reclaim the word and its meaning, which would continue into the 80s and early 90s as the movement became more mainstream until the late 90s, when queer finally took on the meaning it has now. It should be noted that the 70s to the 90s were very messy to find any concrete definitions, as multiple communities, both LGBTQI and otherwise, had adopted, evolved, and overall used their own meaning for the word queer. How the word queer, which at the beginning of the 1900s was a derogatory term, eventually evolved into what the HRC, or Human Rights Campaign, defines as a catch-all term for someone whose identity counters the mainstream is rather simple. The history of queer can best be summed up with the word amelioration, or the taking on of a more positive meaning. Amelioration is a two-step process. Step 1 is reframe, and step 2 is empowerment as self-identification. But let's get into what that actually means. Step 1 of amelioration is community members, in this case the LGBTQIA community, choosing to reclaim a word and use it as self-identification, committing themselves to purposely altering the word's meaning or connotation. What you see here is one of the many protests that happened in the late 20th century, where the LGBTQ community fought for their rights, and in the process also reclaimed the word queer. Although it is historically contested, Queer Nations claims that they were the first ones to use queer positively. Some of the first examples of queer being used positively was during protests for LGBTQ rights and awareness. Protesters took queer back by using it to describe themselves before oppressors could use it as a slur. In everyday use was the slogan, "We're here and we're queer." Step 2 is when people outside the community begin to recognize minorities as empowered, which, given the current political and cultural climate, is far from complete, as the safety of queer students is being questioned, especially after the tragic loss of Dagny Benedict, who died February 2024 after being assaulted by fellow students. As such, the LGBTQ community, alongside its allies, is still fighting for equal treatment and equal standing with the heterosexual or straight community. This commitment to equal rights can be seen at this Pride rally from 2019. So why does this all matter? Since the beginning of the 21st century, society, specifically the youth, has become radically more inclusive and more expressive of their identity, be it their gender or sexuality. As such, the culture around the LGBTQ community has drastically shifted in the past 20 years. Queer identity overall is more public-facing and becoming more prominent in the classroom, especially as the culture is becoming less and less stigmatized. It's important for students to feel safe in the classroom, and understanding their culture and language is the first step to establish a safe environment. However, despite the younger generation being more welcoming of the LGBTQ community, queer children still face many difficulties both inside and outside the classroom. The Don't Say Gay bill was known for its blocking of any kind of confidentiality for students in the classroom, especially regarding gender identity and sexuality. Since the bills passed in Florida, more than a dozen states have adopted similar legislation, with 26 other states having no legislation protecting queer children in schools. With all this in mind, it's no surprise that studies show 3/4 of queer students feel unsafe in school. Educators not only set the standard for culture and student interactions, but also help establish the standards among other faculties. Teachers are some of the most prominent adults in their students' lives. As educators, your behavior, knowledge, and acceptance of the queer community can have some of the most significant impact on students feeling confident, safe, and welcomed in not only their classroom, but their community in general. Given another 50 years, queer could mean something else entirely. Given its current history of meaning, queer could become a synonym for alternative or something completely new. As language continues to evolve, educators need to be adaptable to the language that is used in the classroom, especially for minority groups like the LGBT plus community. Educators also need to be comfortable and trust that these groups can determine what words will empower them personally, as it should not be any ally's responsibility to determine the meaning of labels. Look, culture is always changing. Language is just one part of that, but it is the most important part. Sharing a dialect creates trust between educators and students. Building trust is the first step to creating a positive and productive classroom. It is also the first step in providing students with a safe and welcoming place in uncertain times. As culture changes, it's important to remember that the compassion and education we provide are crucial for the generation of tomorrow. And as they change, we must be able to adapt and accommodate them to the best of our ability. And on that final note, I wish you the best of luck.